Have you ever dreamed of a bigger life? Promised yourself that you will begin tomorrow. Only to watch tomorrow quietly slip away, over and over again. If you have ever felt ambitious but stuck in inaction, then this story is for you. And it might just change how you live your life forever. On the outskirts of a quiet American town, there stood a vast piece of land, wide, open, and filled with silent promise. The soil was rich, dark, and ready to give life to anything planted within it. Anyone who saw it would immediately think of opportunity. But the one who owned it saw something different. Every morning, the young man sat on his wooden porch, a cup in his hand, eyes fixed on the empty land before him. In his mind, it was never empty. He saw rows of thriving crops stretching into the distance. He saw trees heavy with fruit, swaying gently in the breeze. He saw people coming from far away, admiring what he had built. In his thoughts, he was already successful. But in reality, nothing moved. No crops. No grass. No effort. The land remained untouched, as if waiting for permission to come alive. Days passed, then weeks. The sun rose and set over the same bare ground. The wind blew across it with nothing to carry. Even weeds had not claimed it yet, it was as though the land itself was holding its breath. Still, he talked. If anyone asked, he had everything planned. He spoke with confidence, describing every detail of the future he would create. He used words like soon, one day, and when the time is right. But there was one thing missing: action. Deep down, beneath all the dreams and promises, was a quiet truth he refused to face: dreaming felt easier than doing. And so, he stayed where he was. Comfortable, hopeful, and unmoving. Because, someday, had become his favorite place to live. One quiet afternoon, just as the sun hung lazily in the sky, the young man heard the sound of tires crunching against gravel. A car pulled up beside the house. It was his uncle. A man known not for many words, but for a life built on discipline and hard work. The young man smiled as he walked out to greet him, confident as always. But the moment his uncle stepped onto the land, his expression changed. His eyes moved slowly across the wide stretch of soil, empty, untouched, lifeless. He stopped. "Nothing?" he asked, his voice calm but heavy. The young man let out a small laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm still planning," he replied. "I want to do it right." His uncle said nothing for a moment. He simply looked around again, taking in the silence, the wasted potential, the time that had clearly passed without action. Then, without arguing, without raising his voice, he reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 small seeds. He placed them gently into the young man's hand. "Plant these," he said quietly. "And watch." There was no long lecture. No pressure. Just those simple words. Curiosity got the better of him. Later that day, he walked onto the empty land and planted both seeds. Not carefully. Not intentionally. Just enough to say it was done. He brushed the dirt off his hands and walked away. No plan. No commitment. No expectation. And just like every other day, he returned to doing nothing. A few days passed. The young man didn't think much about the seeds. In fact, he almost forgot about them entirely. Life continued the way it always had: late mornings, empty plans, and long hours spent imagining a future he still hadn't started. But one afternoon, something felt different. He couldn't explain it. Maybe it was curiosity. For the first time in days, he stood up and walked toward the land. Step by step, he moved closer, his eyes scanning the ground ahead. And then, he stopped. His breath caught. The empty land was no longer empty. Weeds had taken over. They spread across the soil like they had been waiting for this moment, thick, wild, and aggressive. They covered the ground quickly, stretching in every direction, claiming space without hesitation. It was overwhelming. But what shocked him even more, was what he almost didn't see. There, beneath the chaos, was the mango seed. It had grown, but only slightly. A small, fragile sprout, barely pushing through the soil, struggling for light, nearly buried under everything that had grown faster. The young man stepped closer, his chest tightening. "How?" he whispered. He hadn't watered it. He hadn't cared for it. Yet something still grew. But not what he expected. The weeds didn't wait. They didn't need permission. They didn't need effort. They simply took over. And for the first time, a thought hit him hard. If this could happen to his land so quickly, what was happening to his life? Shaken by what he had seen, the young man immediately called his uncle. By evening, the old man arrived. They stood side by side, facing the land, no longer empty, but no longer full of promise either. It was now crowded, messy, and out of control. The young man pointed at the weeds, frustration rising in his voice. "I don't understand. I didn't even do anything. How did this happen so fast?" His uncle looked at him, calm as ever. "That's exactly why," he said. The young man frowned. "What do you mean?" The old man stepped forward, gently pushing aside some of the weeds to reveal the small mango sprout beneath. "Weeds don't need discipline," he said. "They don't need effort. They don't wait for the right time. They grow on their own." He paused, letting the words settle. "Anything useless, anything that adds no value, grows easily." The young man swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the fragile plant struggling to survive. "But this," his uncle continued, pointing to the mango sprout, "this is different. Something valuable needs attention. It needs patience. It needs consistent work." Silence fell between them. For the first time, the young man truly saw it, not just the land, but himself. All this time, he thought doing nothing meant staying the same. But he was wrong. Doing nothing was a decision. And that decision was allowing the wrong things to grow. His dreams hadn't disappeared. They had simply been buried. Without wasting another second, the young man rushed to the shed, grabbed his tools, and ran back to the land. This time, there was no hesitation. No tomorrow. No excuses. He dropped to the ground and began pulling out the weeds. One after another, fast and aggressively. As if he could erase months of inaction in a single day. He worked harder than he ever had before, his hands rough, his breathing heavy, sweat running down his face. The sun climbed higher, but he didn't stop. In his mind, he had only one goal. Clear everything. Fix everything. Now. But from a distance, his uncle watched quietly, and then called out to him. "Stop." The young man paused, confused, breathing heavily. "I have to get rid of all of this," he said. "I've wasted too much time." His uncle walked closer, his voice calm but firm. "And you think destroying yourself in one day will fix it?" The young man said nothing. You didn't create this in a day, his uncle continued. So you can't fix it in a day either. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. Here, he said, handing it over. The young man looked down. Written on it were 3 simple rules. 1. Make it small. 2. Create easy routines. 3. Be consistent with the first 2. That's how real change happens, his uncle said. Not in bursts of effort, but in steady steps you can repeat every day. The young man stared at the card, the words sinking deep into his mind. For once, his uncle added gently, don't chase results. Build habits. Something about those words felt different. Lighter. Possible. The young man closed his hand around the card and nodded slowly. This time, he wouldn't rush. This time, he would be consistent. The next morning felt different. For the first time, the young man didn't sit on the porch to dream. Instead, he walked straight to the land, card in hand, mind clear. He didn't try to do everything. He remembered the rules. Make it small. So he focused on just one section of the land. A small patch. Nothing overwhelming. He bent down and began pulling weeds, slowly, patiently. Not in a rush. Not trying to prove anything. Just showing up. The next day, he came back. Same spot. Same effort. Then the next day, and the next. At first, the change was almost invisible. The weeds still stretched across most of the land. The mango sprout was still small. But something else was growing. Consistency. Days turned into weeks. The small patch became bigger. The cleared space began to breathe again. Sunlight reached the soil. The mango plant stood taller, no longer buried beneath chaos. And for the first time, the young man didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt in control. He began creating a rhythm, waking up earlier, working a little each day, repeating simple actions without overthinking them. No pressure, no rush. Just progress. His hands grew stronger. His mind grew sharper. And slowly, the land began to reflect his effort. People started noticing. Not because everything was perfect. But because something was finally changing. One evening, he stood quietly, looking over the part of the land he had restored. The breeze moved gently across the soil, and the small mango tree swayed, alive, growing, steady. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the card. The same 3 rules. He smiled. Because now he understood. Success wasn't about big dreams alone. It was about small actions. Done consistently. And this time, he knew. He would never go back to doing nothing. Seasons passed. What once looked like a hopeless piece of land slowly transformed into something extraordinary. The young man stayed true to the simple rules on the card: make it small, create easy routines, be consistent with the first 2. Day by day, he cleared more land. Then he began to plant. Not just one mango seed this time, but many. He spaced them carefully, watered them daily, and protected them from weeds. He paid attention. He showed up, even on days he didn't feel like it. At first, nothing dramatic happened. Just small green shoots pushing through the soil. But he didn't stop. Weeks turned into months. Months into years. And then, everything changed. The small sprouts grew into strong trees. Their branches stretched wide, their leaves thick and vibrant. And one season, for the first time, they bore fruit. Mangoes. Big. Ripe. Sweet. The kind people couldn't ignore. Word began to spread. People from nearby towns, then from distant places, started coming to his land. They came not just for the mangoes, but for the story behind them. The once empty land was now full of life, color, and abundance. And the young man? He was no longer the dreamer who never started. He had become the man who finished what he began. Those who knew him before, those who remembered his lazy days, could hardly believe it. They looked at him with surprise, even admiration. What changed, they would ask. How did you become this successful? The young man would simply smile. He would reach into his pocket, and bring out the small, worn card his uncle had given him years ago. 3 simple rules. Nothing fancy. Nothing complicated. But everything he needed. And as he held it, he knew. This wasn't just how he grew a garden. It was how he rebuilt his life. Most people think failure comes from lack of opportunity. But this story shows something deeper, something more uncomfortable. Sometimes, failure comes from having too much potential, and doing nothing with it. The young man was never unlucky. He was never lacking resources. He had the land. He had the time. He had the vision. What he lacked was action. And that's where many people see themselves. We live in a world where dreaming is easy. Planning is easy. Talking about success is easy. You can imagine a better life in seconds. But building that life? That requires something most people avoid, discipline. The weeds in the story were never just weeds. They represent the small habits we ignore, the distractions we allow, the excuses we repeat, the comfort we choose over growth. And just like in the garden, they grow fast. Effortlessly. Silently. Until one day, they take over everything. The truth is, your life is always growing something. If you don't plant purpose, distraction will grow. If you don't build discipline, laziness will grow. If you don't take control, something else will. And by the time you notice, it might already feel overwhelming. But here's the hope this story gives. Change doesn't require a dramatic start. You don't need to fix everything in one day. You don't need perfect motivation. You don't need to feel ready. All you need is to begin. Small steps. Simple routines. And the courage to be consistent, even when it feels slow. Because real growth is quiet. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't announce itself. But day by day, it builds something powerful. Something lasting. And one day, just like the young man, you will look at your life and realize. The results you once dreamed about are now standing right in front of you. So don't wait for the perfect time. Don't wait until you feel ready. Start small. Stay consistent. And trust the process. Because the life you want is already waiting beneath the surface. You just have to be willing to grow it. Now I want to hear from you in the comment. What is one small step you will take today to achieve your dream? If this story inspired you, please like and share it to someone that needs this. Subscribe for more powerful, life-changing stories like this. See you next time. Until then, stay patient. Remain grateful. And remember, you don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to take the first step.